right, I want to welcome you all to Hopeful Tribe for our very first panel on decolonization. I'm so excited. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I am recording from unceded, occupied Ohlone land. And before we get started, as part of my acknowledgement of that, I want to share from the Segurite Land Trust. Can you guys see it?
Mm-hmm.
Good, good, good. Just want to give a little shout out and please feel free to donate at any point. These are amazing urban indigenous women trying to rematriate the land. And since we're talking about decolonization, I thought, let me make sure I share that. So,
Oh, Mateo.
I am Sue Ferrer, uh, founder of Hopeful Tribe, which is a happy little channel, um, trying to spread some love and joy as we skip down the path towards our collective liberation. And this is my friend Meckell.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for having me. Peace, everyone. My name is Meckell Milburn. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. And I am the owner of Revolutionary Healing LLC, which is a holistic organization that centers Black women and femmes. And also live in Mexico City and have a YouTube channel called Travel Well with Meckell that primarily supports Black folks who are seeking to leave the United States and finding accessible ways to do so, and just really thinking about how we are navigating relocation and leaving the U.S. So happy to be here.
My name is Pascal Robert. I'm the co-host of a podcast called This is Revolution podcast with my host Jason Miles. I'm also a contributor and writer for Black Agenda Report and Newsweek. I've been writing online and doing online media for over a decade. I generally cover issues regarding Black politics, Haitian politics, and global affairs and global events. And I'm very, very honored to have been invited to this consortium of thought makers and idea havers, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I am a poverty scholar, that houseless mama, that houseless daughter. I'm a poverty scholar, all those people you don't want to see, never want to be, look away from me. What you gonna do, arrest me? We're in your city. Yeah, I'm a poverty scholar and I rock my jailhouse attire because me and my po mama did jail time for the poverty crime of being unhoused, unsheltered in this occupied indigenous holler. I'm a poverty scholar, the melanin challenged daughter of a strong Afro-Boricua mama for without whom there would be no me, a mama soltera and a welfare queen. And thank you to the ancestors of this stolen land who are still here 529 years later. Thank you to all of the bodies of all cultures from all four corners who built this Americlan project that is so loaded with terror. And thank you, Sue, for this hope and for this beautiful day. Oh, Mateo.
Thank you for being here. I really believe that we can liberate ourselves. And I don't think we're all going to be free until everyone's free. And so this year, I decided that I was going to focus hard on decolonizing our minds and recovering from all the binaries and colonial thinking, you know, um, as a public service, just so that people who haven't been exposed to these thoughts um, will have some exposure if they happen onto the channel, right? So I'm really happy you guys all joined me. And this first question is pretty basic, but I thought, what the heck? Let's start from the beginning with what is decolonization? and people are welcome to just jump in when they feel moved.
I mean, I think that the question of what is decolonization first must begin with what exactly is the process of colonization, or who is colonized and what does it mean, right?
Yes.
And for my particular political education, as someone who considers myself to be oppositional in my thinking, the first question we have to inquire is that why would one want to be oppositional in the first place? Because oftentimes those of us who may consider ourselves radical, progressive, left, revolutionary, whatever term you may want to use to frame our oppositional politics, because we generally socialize amongst our own enclaves, it is very easy for us to fail to realize that we are not the norm in terms of the worldviews that we have. And quite frankly, the majority of the people that we have in our society, in America, because we are in America, are propagandized or socialized, maybe not propagandized, to believe that the system upon which they live is normative in its functionality. So for me, the first question of what is decolonization is the acknowledgement that you are looking at the normative functioning of American and Western civilization and saying, by asking that question, that this system is not normative. In other words, that what this global system of various iterations of hierarchies and social realities, social relations, economic, gendered, patriarchal, otherwise, whatever you want to call them, to say what is decolonization first makes the position, the argument, that the normative function of how our world works is off, is incorrect, is antagonistic to what we believe is a more humane functionality. Now, the question that then would then proceed would be then, why is it that the system is off? People seem to love living in the West, in America. Folks like to watch their basketball, football, soccer. Folks like to be able to go online and buy Amazon. People love to have their little vacation and all of their material accoutrement. What do you mean? What's wrong with America? What's wrong with capitalism? Et cetera, so on and so forth. For me, when we talk about decolonization, and some may disagree with me, I look at the problems of society from the lens of materialism, dialectical materialism, and historical materialism. What does that mean? And oftentimes it's hard for me to convey this to some of my black and brown friends. The first question I would ask them is that, particularly to black folk, is that if white or Western society did not generate any profit from bringing Africans to the New World, if that was a negative economic enterprise that presented no profit, would it have been done? And I'll make the argument that if it was not profitable to bring African labor to North America, to extract revenue from that labor for free, probably Africans would have not been brought over. Maybe someone else would have been brought over. Maybe they would have continued with Native Americans because they enslaved many of them as well. Maybe they would have. But the bottom line is that when we understand that we are talking about empire-like behavior, because a colony is a possession of a nation state or an empire, then we have to really understand that empires are based on revenue, and that revenue is based on the material relationship between the empire and its subjects. And once we realize that the motivation that drives the processes of these Western empires whether they be America, the British, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, is greed and wealth extraction, and that the hierarchy of race and color helps facilitate that wealth extraction, then for me, my politics forces me to say to decolonize means that I have to attack the system that allows the wealth extraction and the wealth accumulation that drives empire. And my politics tells me that you cannot talk about decolonizing without rooting that process in fighting, neutralizing, and destroying capitalism.
Mm.
Not only does it have to be part of your process, that should be the initial part of your process. Because if we make the metaphor that empire is an engine, the engine cannot work without its fuel. And capital is the fuel that generates this engine. For many of my friends always say, well, Pascal, I don't hear you talking about white supremacy. You always talk about capitalism. Why don't you talk about white supremacy? I said, because capitalism is the dark horse that white supremacy rides on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I asked a simple question. I don't like the term white supremacy, and I will tell you, I'll be very frank. I don't find anything supreme about white people. I don't like the term white supremacy because I think it concedes too much to Europeans. I think that you put yourself in a position of weakness and vulnerability when you turn the system that has allowed them to acquire power into some kind of metaphysical, like super deep, complex thing that is like, oh, white supremacy. It's just, you become crippled by this thing. The white supremacy. Mm-hmm. I don't like to look at it that way. And to be frank, perhaps one of the reasons that I do not find myself intoxicated with the concept of white supremacy is that regardless of the current condition of my ancestral homeland, regardless of how poor it is or how backwards it may seem, I know that in 1804, Africans and slaves destroyed 3 Western empires where my parents came from in the height of their power in Haiti, and at least for a day on January 4th, 1804, white supremacy died.
Oh, my dear.
So I am not going to concede anything supreme about these folk, where a bunch of, right off the slave ship Africans and a few other blacks on a country during the height of the transatlantic slave trade can defeat the French Empire, the British Empire, and the Spanish Empire, and give Napoleon Bonaparte one of his first, literally his first major loss. So from my vantage, conceding even a concept of white supremacy is somewhat offensive to my ancestors. Because I asked my friends who concentrate on white supremacy, I said, let me ask you a question. If the European or the white man didn't have media, didn't have money, didn't have guns, didn't have nuclear arms, and didn't have the ideological superstructure, books, literature, otherwise, to make you feel that you are lesser than him, would he be supreme? Would he control anything? Would he have any power? If the answer is no, then why don't we fight the system that gives him the weapons, the guns, the money, the media, and the ideological superstructure for us to believe that he is, quote unquote, supreme in the first place? And I find that when we start talking like that, that is when they start to get worried. They don't have a problem with you talking about white supremacy and decolonialization. And so let's talk about we want to fight capitalism. Whoa, what?
I call it capitalism. That's and you're right. Oh, you're right. Yeah. I don't know if I could jump in or if you want to.
Yeah, jump in.
I mean, I heard everything and I totally agree. And I also will say that, I didn't really talk about the work that we do in my intro because I'm a poet. And I also teach through verse because I'm not, I think about different ways of transmitting and spirit. But we're, when me and my mom were sleeping on the street, which was for most of my childhood, not because it was fun, not because it was cute, not because we were camping and we had an REI tent, but because Ma got lost her job, and also her body was sexually violated and her basically abused over 210 times as a mixed race orphan and a child in the system, an unprotected child, which is some of the most dangerous things you can do. But she keeps on keeping on. Some people talk about resilience. I don't believe that. I believe us poor people put on our clothes and keep it moving. Because what else the fuck are we gonna do? But anyway, fast forward to she had managed to get a job off of welfare, as I call it, welfare, and got that crumb. And then she did the very thing that you're talking about, Pascal, within an institution, and was summarily fired by a white psychologist. I don't know if that person's color mattered, but they were definitely an agent of the very state that you talk about, because that system cannot be held in place with just guns and money, and language and all of these other things. It has to be held in place with a theory and with agents of that state that operate insidiously. And it's also led to a lot of my work. And I actually think that everything that I do is actively in overturning, resisting, and not in some idea, but in actual real time. The very system and the very lie that you beautifully articulated, Pascal. And in that way, it really was rooted in the ways in which my mom and me were victimized. We used to sleep on the street, in park benches, shelter beds, wherever we could, maybe not be seen by the pigs, by the police. That lasted until I was essentially 22 years old. People used to tell me, you could leave your mom and you'd be fine. I said, wow. Wow. And what would happen to her? But I was a good indigenous daughter, and we don't leave our mamas. None of us leave our mamas when that would mean they'd be on the street and somehow we'd be okay. But that's what I call the cult of independence. And it's at the root, again, of the very thing that you're speaking of. Because you can't hold colonial structures in place without a web of bullshit that is supported, undergirded, taught, and perpetrated by every single player. And, so a lot of our work is unpacking that. But fast forward to our life, at that point, what we did is I was incarcerated for 3 months for the act of being unhoused, which you could argue at that point stopped everything. We had a micro business on the street. We were holding on by a thread, like, millions of poor families all across Mama Earth, from, Southern Turtle Island to Mama Africa. But in this culture, if you're seen as poor people, your bodies are immediately suspect and under attack. And so we were constantly hiding. But at that point, we realized we couldn't continue. And it was at that point that my mom started to learn back the culture that was stolen from her. She started to audit Black studies, Indigenous studies, women's studies, and got to meet with some powerful leaders like Erica Huggins and Gray-Garcia and other warriors who started to help us recognize the connection between poor families, specifically poor women and children all over Mama Earth. And in that process, we started to become and create the movement that is Poor Magazine, which is a poor and indigenous people-led movement. And our entire goal is to unearth, resist, and activate decolonization. Not talk, but do. And right now, it's so beautiful to hear you name those different pieces, because it actually makes me feel less horrible right now, because while we were still sleeping on the street, me and Ma dreamed a vision along with other poverty scholars, as we call ourselves. And that was very recently, I mean, very close to when we met Sue, about the concept of homefulness, a homeless people solution, a homeless, landless people's self-determined solution to homelessness. Not some politrickster concept, not some colonial project lie, but what it really gets at is spiritually and legally unselling Mama Earth. And this is a very important piece if we talk about colonization, because the roots and the principles of colonization, as we're talking about decolonization, land in what I call the lie of private property. We cannot unpack capitalism without talking about accumulation, stealing, and hoarding of both bloodstained dollars, but more importantly, Mama Earth. You cannot perpetrate the capitalist lie without private property as a root basis. And so we are actively, spiritually, and legally unselling, along with guidance from First Nations folks like the beautiful sisters you saw. Those are our elders on our Elephant Council, Karina Gold and Johnella and others who started Segorte Land Trust. We're really unhinging private property from the tight grasp of the settler colonial lie. And it's unbelievably, or maybe very believable, actually hearing you talk about the different pieces so beautifully, how much they're fighting us. Because they're absolutely determined to not let us actually live into a decolonized, decapitalized land liberation movement. And so that's where we are now. But as far as what is decolonization, I believe it's absolutely starts in your heart and your mind. And I know we're going to get into that later. But it's also really at recognizing, how am I complicit in continuing the lie of private property, in continuing the cult of independence, the away nation, and this notion of I got mines and therefore I'm okay. And I do want to lift up Jared Ball, one of our writers for the Poverty Scholarship textbook, and of course from the Black Agenda Report, you probably know him, used to be, and just a badass warrior. In the recent book he wrote, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, because he speaks very much about this very thing that you beautifully said, Pascal, and also the ways in which that lie is perpetrated, so that we can all feel like we're all happily hoarding, accumulating, and buying and stealing, and that all we need to be okay is capitalism. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Something that you just said, Tiny, really spoke to me and really aligns with the way that I approach and think about decolonization. And it is my favorite quote, which is, "Don't believe everything you think." And I think that's really been my process. And the process when I'm in community and just the work that I do is really around understanding how deep rooted the threads of colonialism and capitalism run, so that every day, if I'm committed to this work, I'm having to wake up and really understand where the roots of my thinking are coming from and really challenge that and start unpacking that. And I know that I'm in a place in my life when I feel like I continue recognizing how much work that's going to take. But to your point, Pascal, about capitalism, just thinking about where we are right now in this pandemic world, I think in my lifetime, this has been the biggest example for me, at least in the United States, of just seeing how integral workers are, and how the structures that are built now are built on hundreds of years of slavery, indentured, servitude, and seeing the ways that folks are starting to question the things that they're thinking and the ways that we've been operating in systems in a different way has been really liberating. So my organization, Revolutionary Healing, was started right around the time the pandemic began. And at that time, I was like, okay, anybody, I'm welcoming anyone. But around the time George Floyd got murdered, I shifted my focus to specifically Black women and femmes. And that was very intentional at that time. But one of the things that I had to recognize as someone coming from the wellness world is how much everything I'd learned throughout my career, everything that had been taught to me in the education system was reinforcing capitalism. And that the folks that I represent and the folks I cared about the most were so integral to that system and the ways in which, we talk about, there's a movement right now about radical rest and what that really looks like. And so that's something that I'm feeling like is very connected to my work in decolonization, is what does it truly look like to center ourselves as Black folks and as Black women and femmes? What does it truly look like to take care of ourselves, to rest? What does wellness actually look like when not being utilized to perpetuate the capitalistic system? And it's challenging.
Ooh.
It's been really challenging to start peeling back the layers of that, because again, I too am in this place where I'm still having to unlearn a lot of the ways that I think about how I fit into the overall system. I went to an HBCU. I come from a very Black community, and still it's in my adult life when I'm looking back, like, okay, there are some things that aren't quite adding up here. And I think that work has definitely been fueled since the pandemic began, as I'm seeing, like you were talking about, Tiny, with movements for folks to be able to free land, and conversations about what does it look like for community to come together and create different systems of existing. And I don't know in this moment of examples of large orchestrated pushbacks, but I imagine, and I just knowing the way the system operates, I know that that's coming because it's happening at such a big, fast pace. Even with me, I live in Mexico City right now, and the conversation is continued here as there are a lot of Black folks who have had this realization of the ways in which they were contributing in the capitalistic system and, kind of being a cog in that wheel. And that moment of recognizing that there could be something different for them, that their families, their lineage, and looking at other ways to work to start movements in that area. And for some folks, that looks like what some people here are calling fugitive movements or leaving. We talked before the podcast began about, this idea of different ways that people may find liberation, and what does it mean to think of yourself as, speaking for Black folks, something other than Black first. So those are conversations that are happening here as people are envisioning different ways to live and trying to create communities or come together in a way that is outside of this capitalistic structure. And the difference in what I'm noticing, even in the ways we're able to access community, we're able to have conversations about things like that, has been really profound for me. But I think I'm in this place where I'm constantly moving forward and trying to understand what does that work look like from not being in the United States right now. Like, what does that work continue looking like to unpack, to unlearn, to push back? What are movements looking like in this day and age? So those are questions that I think I have more questions than answers at this point, but it feels like, we're on the verge of having even more momentum than I think I've seen in my lifetime.
Absolutely. I think this is this time has great potential for people to really question and um, expand their minds. I was going to say about white supremacy that it's just one of those lies that was created to justify colonization, right? So you can't go into somebody else's country and murder them if you think they're human beings, right? On the same par as you are a human being, right? So they had to come up with a lie that would justify that kind of action. They had to say, oh, those aren't people. They're not people like you and me. They're animals. Or like when they came here, they said, oh, they're uncivilized savages.
They're
That's how
heathens.
they justified that. Yeah, heathens. Heathens. I identify as a heathen, by the way. I just really wanted to point that out because I feel like part of what keeps driving the system, besides capitalism, Pascal, is historical amnesia. There's this phenomenon, I think, everywhere, where the vast majority of people really don't remember the genocide that came before where we're at right now.
Well, my response to that is that why would we call it amnesia? How can you forget something you've never known?
Mm,
In other words, when people say that America suffers historical amnesia, I understand theoretically what that means. My position is a little bit more assertive than that. Is that people aren't told these things. You're not taught this in school. You're not taught to question the narrative of American exceptionalism in school. You're not taught to challenge the nature of Western hegemony and hierarchy in school. And frankly, the notion of school in a Western context is designed to socialize you to normative function in the system, not to challenge the system. Education in the West is not about breeding revolutionary antagonism towards the system. It's about a job recruitment program, which means to train you how to more effectively render your human life to labor extraction for what you believe is highest compensation, but as reality is a maximization of profit for another entity or institution or corporation. Or if you're considered to be lucky or a smart one, to have you start your own business enterprise where you can generate profit and maximize your ability to extract labor from others. So I don't disagree with you that there's an amnesia because I think it's a little bit more insidious than that.
mhm.
People do now. I mean, yes, they hear it was like, oh, they were the Native Americans, and they were, they died, but people don't know the actual history of the United States. People don't know that the the only reason why this country's land was doubled during the Louisiana territories is because of the Haitian Revolution. They don't know that. Because, and not that we should be proud of that, it's that these Europeans don't want people to know that the greatest Western empire since Rome only exists because of a bunch of Africans on an island that forced Napoleon to sell land that wasn't even his in the first place. Because that truth neutralizes American exceptionalism.
Mm.
The truth that in America we had indentured servitude of poor white people until the Civil War in this country. I learned this recently. We had a very good show by a professor named Warren Miltier, whose specialty is free people of color in the Americas, which are basically black or people of color who could have been Native Americans, but sometimes generally black, who were free before the Civil War. And I read two of his books. In one of his books, he talks about how in America, up until the Civil War, poor white women who were either divorced, sometimes widowed, or economically impoverished could have their children sold off, literally just like black female slaves, into indentured servitude, and that there was a system of labor peonage extracting resources from poor white people that wasn't as bad as slavery, but it was literally contracted indentured servitude. Now, I always thought that period ended in the post-colonial era. This was going on up until the Civil War in America. Now, I'm not saying to say that, they suffered like we suffered. What I'm saying is that what that tells me is that extracting from human beings, even of the color of those who are considered to be supreme, is not outside of the prerogatives of this system. And the charade of color as the proximate necessity is just a charade to keep the majority of them believing the system works for them, when history tells us that the capitalists will ground as many of their own white folk to powder as anyone else. So it's a con game that we need to keep playing to keep the white majority of what 50% or 60% of the population that they say they are, to believe that capitalism only hurts the dark people. It's okay. I get to watch Monday Night Football. But when you tell them that, listen, you realize that your wages have been deflating for 50 years in this country, right? You realize the reason why you're strung out on opium and meth is because the factory that gave 3 generations of your family good jobs where you could go to school and send your kids maybe to college or buy a house are gone. Who did that to you? Was it the Mexican who did that to you? Was it? Was it the Chicano who did that to you? Was it the Chinese immigrant who did that to you? Or was it NAFTA and GATT? Or was it certain policies that capitalists supported? No one teaches you how to challenge those things in school. No one teaches you how to ask those questions. No one teaches you that 10 of the first 12 presidents of the United States were slave owners. Why would they want you to know that? So I understand where you're coming from with the position of a violent amnesia. And I'm not trying to be antagonistic to that argument. I'm saying it's more insidious than that. It's worse than that. Because if they forgot, I would almost give them a slight understanding. They don't know. They don't want to know because they don't want to tell that story. What do we think these battles about school curriculum are really about?
Oh, man.
This isn't about teaching things that they forgot. This is about not letting little suburban white kids know the truth about this country, because some of these folks believe that they are being demographically challenged by population disruption, and that they're clinging to this charade of whiteness is threatened. And that if we start to teach people that the lie of American empire is a lie, that their hierarchies of extraction, and that's all capitalism is a hierarchy of extraction, will start to fall apart. Why do you think people like Jordan Peterson are popular right now?
Mm.
Jordan Peterson is the 21st century manifestation of a man who existed in the early 20th century. You can Google his name. His name is Lothrop Stoddard. Lothrop Stoddard, Stoddard. Lothrop Stoddard. Lothrop Stoddard was a racist, white supremacist who was very popular in the early 20th century, who used to do public debates. He debated Du Bois. He debated a lot of intellectuals. He was literally the Jordan Peterson of his day. He was a eugenicist. He believed in scientific racism. And his whole argument was about how the sanctity of white male patriarchy was being threatened by the changes of society and the inclusion of the black and brown people and the empowerment of those who are not white men. Now, Jordan Peterson may not be as flamboyantly and overtly racist with the language that he uses, but that's exactly what his project is. Jordan Peterson is a reactionary in the true sense of the word, meaning that he wants to go back to a point in history. What point does he want to go back to? He wants to go back to the point where all of the people with the decent jobs were white men, and that women stayed home, were docile and quiet, and America looked like Ozzie and Harriet. What he doesn't realize is that that was something that only existed for 30 years in American history, and it only existed because of the government largesse of the New Deal. And it didn't benefit only but a small sliver of middle class whites anyway. Not a small sliver, a large number, but still the point of the matter is that was because of a government policy. He wants to take America back to a time that was an aberration in the overall history of American capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad I invited you. Pascal, you or anybody jump in to question number 2. What does it mean to decolonize your mind?
That's why we do people school. Decolonizing your mind, and I think that is really in so many ways what we're doing on this panel. So I just want to lift that up. It's about learning. It's about learning what's never taught to us. But that's also really hard to do. I just want to name that. It's really hard to do by us people who've been oppressed by colonization, who've been shoved down and barely are holding on to capitalism and the system that is here to, supposedly help us, but actually profits off us as poor people, specifically as poor black and brown people, indigenous people, and poor houseless folks and poor white people. I do want to name those physicians of poverty really clearly, because if you haven't ever missed a meal, as my mama used to say, then it is a different conversation. And it's all love. I'm not coming at people aggro. I'm just being real about that. Even as we ask that question, we know that those of us who are out there scrounging for our next dollar, like one of my poems says, I'm a poverty scholar, always in struggle for $1. How much time am I spending decolonizing, learning back what was stolen from me, seeking this knowledge that is absolutely outside of everything that was shoved down my throat? Really, real talk. And it really speaks to also what Pascal was saying as well, and Mike as well, because there's this way in which this lie of colonial domination and colonial perfection. Let's not even call it domination. It's not called that. It's called we all okay. I got mines and I'm good. How that's sold to you without even thinking about it. And those of us who are holding on by a thread don't have time to be unpacking that shit. So I want to name that in this conversation. And that's why, we as poor and houseless people spend so much of our time actually trying to do the very thing that you're asking in that question. Those of us who are still struggling with what I call the lie of rent. So again, if you're talking about the lie of private property, you're also talking about the lie of rent. You're talking about the ways in which property, aka Mama Earth, is seen as a commodity. And also, so we can talk about colonization all day. But if you're tripping off where your next meal is or how you're going to keep the roof over your head, right? Let's root that in survival. And also it was so dope to hear what you were saying, Meckell, about rest. Sue is probably laughing, thinking, I hope Tiny's listening. I got an issue with rest. I'm gonna be real right now. When I actually got cancer, I got COVID, and I couldn't stop because I have been working since I'm 4 years old, bruh. And one of the things I wrote at that time, because I do a lot of writing and plug. I wrote a book called Criminal Poverty: Growing Up Homeless in America, but check out poorpress.net because we create curriculum every day on this very issue. And we have a book called Decolonizer's Guide to a Humble Revolution. But I wrote a beautiful love letter. I said, love letter to all the caregivers and the resters. The only way you're going to get me to rest is if you tell me it's work. And I know that sounds twisted, right? Twisted AF, but it's real though. Okay, so again, I want to talk about how do we conversate on these very important things with folks who are just struggling to stay alive. And so anyway, going back to the Decolonize Your Mind piece, we created this textbook and this body of work called Poverty Scholarship, Poor People Led Theory, Art, Words, and Tears Across Mama Earth. And one of the things that our point in that is to recognize us in struggle as having knowledge. Even those of us who struggle with our own colonization. And that's the tricky one. And when people come to People School, it's not us lecturing. It's not us telling you what you should do, but it's us turning the camera back and saying, how can you, as folks who haven't missed a meal, take responsibility for the ways in which you perpetrate and continue to activate capitalism? And it's a challenge. It's not easy. You're right when you're saying that, Meckell. It's a challenge to flip the things that we've been spoon-fed as normal, as Pascal's talked about. And I just want to say that, even when people come to People School, we're like, you're just in kindergarten with this. This is just the beginning. How you gonna turn back 529 years of lives in a 2-day seminar? Oh, hell no, right? But it's a beginning. And it actually incorporates literally the way you walk through the world. And so we call it Degentrification Decolonization Seminar because we actually hope and love and hold people in that shift in their walk. And what I'll, the easy thing to say, to kind of the tangible thing for the takeaway for people to hear on this question is, I always say it begins with humility. which sounds really simple. You know, and I'm not talking about Winnie the Pooh and the sunset, some hippie bullshit. I'm talking about humility and the ways that humility has been ripped away from people involved in the colonial project called Americlan. You know, people are specifically white middle class people are told as children, you could go anywhere. You could be anything you want. No, you can't. The first thing I tell people when they come to people school is like, no, actually you can't. No, you can't. And that, in fact, that arrogance is at the root of colonization. And that arrogance that is not just in whiteness, but that is rooted in whiteness, is actually rooted in this idea that the whole world is mine, not just to necessarily take, but to inhabit. And so, you know, again, teaching back humility, and I would say for the easy takeaway for anybody watching this beautiful panel, pray on humility, fam, and pray on the privilege that you have right now. Those are the little pieces that'll begin the decolonization of your mind.
How to decolonize your mind. Thank y'all. Thank you for sharing. So growing up, I hated history. I hated learning history in school. It was something that was really like pulling teeth for me. And I think the reason for that was that the narratives just weren't matching up. You know, learning that the pilgrims were handed land and goods and things like that, or that Christopher Columbus discovered a place that people were already inhabiting. Like it just didn't add up for me. And so when I think about decolonizing my mind, I think what has been really helpful for me is learning the truth and hearing stories. Storytelling has been really big in my community. And although some of our family lineage, of course, has been inaccessible because I am the descendant of enslaved Africans as well. But what we do know, really trying to formulate an understanding from those perspectives and reading and, you know, just seeing things from a perspective outside of what was handed to me. I think for me, and I'm going to say this as someone who's recognizing my privilege in this, but I began loving learning about history when I first began traveling outside of the United States. And those are also the times when I began understanding more deeply the role that America plays in other parts of the world, the histories and the schooling that people have gotten in other countries about American history that I wasn't privileged to, because the narrative was very much tailored to keep me as a part of this capitalistic system. So kind of going back to what you were saying, Pascal, about just the knowledge, like the people that don't want to know, right? And so for those of us who do want to know, who are sharing truths, who are reframing some of the narratives that have been handed to us through the colonizer's lens, that part has been integral in my journey of decolonizing and creating space to have those stories, creating space to understand that there are, you know, even learning about histories of revolutions, right? Because I think that's really important in this moment where we are on the verge of such big shifts and revolution happening. There is a move to not want people to know about revolutions that have happened around the world or historical movements that have happened that we're now building upon. A lot of that, you know, folks want to sweep under the rug and try to make it feel as though we're back in square one, and that's just not the case. And the more that we're able to talk about that and learn about that, I think it really strengthens the move to decolonize our minds collectively.
counter-hegemonic thinking is under siege in America. To answer the question for me, what does it mean to decolonize the mind? The first step is that how does one develop counter-hegemonic thinking? How do you develop in a person, in a human being, in a child, thinking that is rooted in deconstructing the power of the all-powerful institutions of the world? For me, I can trace why I think like this to the kind of folks I had in my family. I came from a Haitian family of uh, men and women on my father's side who had radical politics. My father had two brothers who studied in the Soviet Union, who were hardcore Haitian Marxists and communists in the 60s under Papa Doc, one of the most anti-communist presidents in Haitian history. In Haitian history, my father's family really had radical oppositional politics towards injustice. They were not poor; they were upper middle class, fairly dark complexion Haitians, but they had very radical politics for Haitian elites, not necessarily bourgeois elites, but petite bourgeois type elites. My mother's family came from very petite bourgeois, religious aristocracy. My great grandfather was an Episcopal bishop in Haiti. But having a paternal family where every Saturday when my father had his friends come over for dominoes and vodka or rum and talking about politics and imperialism and the Yankees and what they're doing all over the world and so on and so forth, that type of counter-hegemonic thinking penetrated into my psyche as a young child.
Mm.
And I enjoyed hearing those conversations and seeing that kind of discourse and participating at the degree that I could as a young boy. And I could say that if I didn't have those foundations, I might not have the counter hegemonic thinking that I have now. But I would say that one of the ways that we should instill this in our children, in our kids, in our youth, is that we need to have social meetings, not based on politics, but on joy, just like my uncles did, who were playing cards, spades, dominoes, horseshoes, or whatever, listening to music, sitting around, playing board games, having conversations about politics with the children around, talking about empire, talking about decolonialism. We can do this and not have it be a chore. Having barbecues, cookouts, where we sit together and we have these conversations, telling stories about the old days and what it was like in the old times. Fellowship. And that doesn't have to be limited to people in the church. People without politics don't fellowship anymore. Everyone was talking about we got to organize, we got to mobilize. They make it seem like such work. Why does it have to be unpleasant? When is the last time you heard people with our kind of politics say, let's have a barbecue, let's go roller skating?
I love it.
I love it too. That's my page. I think that it is possible to talk about these really hard concepts and have fun. And in fact,
Can we
for
have like
me,
a progressive?
it's not possible to have one without the other.
Yeah.
Because
Let's
if
just have
I'm
like
just all the time on the serious track of revolution, I just want to hurt myself, or other people. I need to balance that with joy.
yeah. Why can't we just have like a cookout, a barbecue, a card game, some dominoes, whatever indigenous interesting games? Show me what your people play when they were together, sitting down. What do they do?
So in the Bay Area, a couple of years ago, they started the Black Joy Parade. And I feel like it is one of the most radical things that we're able to see develop, because it offers a different perspective, a different side to the story, and an opportunity for us to really be in community and celebrate.
And one of my favorite people in the Bay Area is a woman named Gail Meadows, and she runs this amazing little revolutionary school in San Francisco called Meadows Livingstone. And in that school, kids grow up learning all this stuff. Like you were talking about, Pascal, it's from kindergarten to sixth grade. And my baby went there, and I just really admire the curriculum and also the fortitude of Gail for keeping it going all these years. She's amazing. Oh yeah, you know her, huh, Tiny?
Yes.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then on Tiny's campus, they have Decolonize Academy. You want to talk about what you guys do there?
Well, yeah, it actually I was gonna talk about it, and then I got sidetracked on everything, but so many beautiful things, right? So we call it Decolonize Academy, and we say that we're sharing knowledge with youth poverty scholars. All of our youth are either homeless or formerly homeless or housing insecure children and adults. So we don't actually, in a decolonial education system, you're not just teaching, working, loving the child, you're teaching, working, holding the whole family. And that's one of the crucial differences, right? So in Decolonize Academy, all of our mamas are our first teachers, and also our uncles and our daddies, and but also, they're also our students, right? And we flip that script, and all of the teachers of herstory, as we say, interesting what you were saying, Meckell, is all, are people who are teaching from their own cultural deep structure. So if we're talking about resistance and revolution, of the Black Panthers and others, and one of our, elder Black Panther members come in and teach that. We're talking about indigenous herstory and genocide. One of our First Nations elders comes and teaches that. And on the list goes. Chicano studies is taught by, Chicano warriors and etc. Um, and also the children themselves are teachers. And it flips the construct of leadership, and also really teaching is through many different things, right? Teaching is also through sharing food with the community that we do all the time as homeless and formerly homeless people. We're sharing food with over 800 folks, diapers, the Poor Mama's Diaper Fund. We support folks who live in encampments. And so our young people learn through that as well, learn through recognizing that they have power to actually affect change in their own families. Take back the shame around the success narrative in colonization, which we also didn't really touch on. But these lies of upward mobility, of success, are all rooted in accumulation and hoarding, and stealing, of already stolen land. So again, if we're going to be talking about these things, we also have to really conversate about how do you roll those back and how do you shift that idea. And so our young folks are taught also survival skills, how real things, how to cook healthy food with very little money, how to learn science from Mama Earth. And it's really hard. I just want to name that. It's really hard, this work in real time. I always say it's one thing to fight, it's another thing to build. Especially as hurting people, trying to help other hurting people.
Hmm.
Right? We don't engage with the police. We don't engage with the system that tests, arrests, and incarcerates us. Because then they're going to perpetrate more deaths, on our Black and brown and poor bodies. That's really hard because as poor people, we hurt each other all the time. Sue knows this firsthand as one of our revolutionary advocates and caregivers. Um, these are all very, very hard things. We're not mandated reporters. That doesn't mean we look the other way from the abuse that happens in our families. It means we pull in closer. These acts of what I call mama-festation are very hard to do. And we're dedicated to doing it. And I love your idea about the having fun. We try to do that, Pascal, and it's funny. Um, on the road to trying to have more fun, we end up having more work. But that's just our particular trauma. And I think it's partly because, again, we're working with a lot of people who are constantly in struggle. So, like, we'll have to pick people up and make sure they get to places and get all these things going. And, hopefully when we all get the boot of the lie of rent off our collective necks and they let us open homefulness, oh, yeah, best believe. Pascal, we'd love you to come and lead a chess game with the youth scholars. Come to game night at Hopefulness because, yeah, we're putting that on the calendar. And Meckell maybe can come and help us learn how to rest a little more. I know Sue's trying all the time.
I love it. You guys are so amazing. I wanted to let you off the hook because I'm sure you all have other things that you need to do with your Friday. But I also wanted to ask if you would consider doing another, like a part 2 of this panel, because there's so much more to say.
I think it's possible. We can schedule it.
Cool.
Definitely.
Way cool. Because this was an awesome beginning. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think we just wrote a digital book together somehow.
Right?
Real talk. I don't even. I'm gonna look at this video again to like sit inside of it. But yes, I'm down. Thank you, Sue. Always.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys.
I want to tell you
Thank
that
you.
I'm very honored that you all allowed me to be here as the only testosterone-induced specimen in the space. I felt I was not triggered. I did not feel gender oppressed in any way whatsoever.
Thank you
Please
so
forgive
much.
me for fulfilling the traditional patriarchal role of talking too much. I did not mansplain or do any of those things.
Well, one of the reasons I like doing panels like this too is because I'm able to learn, share my perspective, grow, expand. And so I thank both of you. And yes, Pascal, I learned a lot from you today as well. So thank you.
I very much enjoyed this. Maybe we can have some of you all, or all of you all, or the consortium of you all as a guest on our show. This is Revolution Podcast someday on a Saturday or something like that. We could just all kind of come together and just chill and rap about world events and whatnot. You probably have my email through Jason or Jason's email, Sue. So keep in touch with us. I very much enjoyed this Friday afternoon conversation, and I felt very empowered speaking to 3 brown women about like these issues. That made me feel very edified as a human being, not as a man, but as a human being. Quite frankly, me and Jason would like to have more of that presence on our show.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Set us up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, y'all. Have a great rest of your weekend.
All right.
Take
Love you
good
guys.
care.
Bye-bye.
Peace, y'all.